What if the ancestral homeland wasn't where the myth said it was? For generations, across thousands of ocean miles, Polynesian families have whispered the same name, Hawaiki, a sacred homeland somewhere to the west, a place where spirits return, a place remembered not through maps, but through blood. But blood has its own language. In lab after lab, under microscopes and sequencers, something strange began to emerge. A tiny genetic beacon, mDNA haplogroup B4A1A1. It shows up again and again. In Hawaii, in Aotearoa, in Rapa Nui. It's everywhere. Almost every Polynesian alive today carries it in their mother's line. So common, it became known as the Polynesian motif. But here's the twist, this motif, it didn't originate in Polynesia. It was born thousands of kilometers away. In East Asia, along humid river valleys and jungle shores, Taiwan, the northern Philippines, not the lush volcanic islands where hula is danced or haka shouted into wind. Not where the chants say it began. This isn't just science. It's identity splitting at the seams. How can your ancestors rise from one ocean when your soul swears it came from another? The contradiction cuts deep. Oral traditions are sacred. Their memory, song, prayer, carved into canoe wood, passed from elder to child. But now, in ancient ear bones and modern saliva kits, the story seems to twist. This mtDNA isn't an echo. It's a map. And it's telling us the mothers of Polynesia didn't originate from the islands at all. Their roots stretch back to forests and mountains far beyond the horizon. So what happened? Were these women carried willingly across the Pacific? Were they settlers or survivors? Were the myths wrong? Or do they point to something even older, even deeper? Because if the Polynesian story didn't begin in Polynesia, if the mothers came from faraway lands, then the whole Pacific tale needs to be rewritten. And the truth is only just beginning to surface. They left no written words, no flags, no stone walls, just wind, wood, and whispers in the waves. 5,000 years ago, long before Polynesia had a name, a quiet exodus began, not from the islands, but from a jagged green coastline thousands of miles to the northwest. Taiwan. Today, it's satellites and swabs that reveal the trail. But back then, it was canoes. Silent ones. Ghost canoes. Slipping south through the Philippines, past coral reefs and volcanic thrones, riding monsoons into the unknown. Here's the twist. Their voices never truly vanished. Because the languages spoken today in Samoa, Tahiti, Hawaii, they aren't island-born. They descend directly from the tongues of Taiwan's indigenous tribes, like branches of the same ancestral tree. Formosan to Fijian, Austronesian to Polynesian. But it wasn't just language they carried. Pottery, plants, domesticated animals, and something even smaller, almost invisible, DNA, found not in bones alone, but in the remains of rats, stowaways, carried across the sea like sacred cargo. Their genetic code, a breadcrumb trail, leading from Taiwan to Tonga, then further east. In the sands of Vanuatu, archaeologists uncovered skeletons from the Lapita Culture, a people known for their tattooed pots and seafaring genius. Their bones, full of secrets, sequenced in modern labs, they link back, unmistakably, to Taiwan and the northern Philippines. But something doesn't add up. If these early voyagers moved so fast, so far, how did they know where to go? No GPS, no compass, just stars, memory, and instinct. And more hauntingly, were they alone? Because buried beneath this genetic journey is a silence, a gap, a pause in the story. Because somewhere between the islands and the Asian mainland, the bloodlines change. A shadow appears in the genome, one that doesn't trace back to Taiwan. A ghost not from the north, but from the deep forests of Melanesia. And it seems, these travelers didn't just carry cargo. They picked up passengers along the way. It should have been simple, a genetic map pointing one direction. But then, something fractured. In the bones of Polynesian mothers, the story is clear. Over 90% carry the same maternal signal, the Polynesian motif. A lineage born in East Asia, passed down without break, from daughters to cross oceans, across centuries. But the men? That's where the silence breaks. Because when scientists traced the Y chromosomes, the paternal line, they found a different story. Not Asian, not pure, nearly 70%. Melanesian. It's a paradox, a split, as if two migrations happened at once, one carried by the womb, the other by the sword. So what happened? Some say it was peaceful, a merging of families, alliances carved with shells and smiles. Others see something darker, raids, captives, voyages where women stayed, but the men changed. The answer may lie in one ancient custom, matrilocality. In many Austronesian cultures, after marriage, men would leave their own land and live with their wife's family. Imagine that generations of Melanesian men arriving by canoe, marrying into Asian-descended clans, their sons absorbing the languages, the myths, but carrying their father's blood. The result? A society with an Asian voice, an island soul, and a hybrid heartbeat. It's more than genes. It's identity in conflict. Who tells the story when half of it was never written down? This is an ancestry, its legacy. A genetic tug-of-war, not just between continents, but inside every Polynesian man and woman. And it doesn't stop there. It shapes who Polynesians became. They were never meant to be found. Shards of clay, forgotten beneath layers of ash and sand, marked with strange, repeating patterns. Tiny teeth pressed into wet earth. Code, left behind not in writing, but in pottery. And for years, no one could read it. Then came the match. Lapita, a culture that spanned thousands of miles, from the Bismarck Archipelago through Vanuatu, Tonga, Samoa. Wherever the dentate stamp pottery appeared, so did something else. A particular strain of DNA. Asian in origin, Polynesian in expression. Suddenly, it wasn't just shards, it was identity. These were not just potters. They were navigators. The first to carry not only sails, but entire societies across the sea. Farmers, storytellers, priests, families. Each canoe was a floating archive, language, myth, kinship, all packed into a hull of carved wood. But the real revelation? They weren't alone. Pacific rats, Ratu's excellence, tiny passengers tucked in with the taro. Chickens, too. Their bones turn up in ancient layers across the Pacific. And when their DNA is sequenced, it sings the same song, the same routes, the same stops. Animals don't lie. They only go where humans take them. And that's the heartbreak, isn't it? These weren't just migrations. They were entire worlds on the move. Every grain of sand, every petal, every paw. Evidence of people bringing not just their bodies, but their memories, their cosmos. Lapita wasn't just culture. It was continuity. And for the first time, science could trace it. Not in myths, not in maps, but in teeth marks on clay, in chicken bones buried beside the dead, in the quiet echo of mitochondrial strands. But as the Lapita Trail pushes east, past the edge of known settlement, from the Bismarcks to the Marquesas, something strange begins to happen. Every voyage east meant losing something west. It didn't show in the tattoos, or the chants, or the way they carved their gods into stone. No, the loss was silent, hidden in blood, in base pairs, in alleles that vanished somewhere between Samoa and the edge of the world. The further they sailed, the fewer they became. A genetic bottleneck, not once, but over and over. Each new island settled by just a handful of voyagers. Brave, brilliant, but biologically limited. What survived wasn't always what was meant to. And what was lost, we may never name. The Polynesian motif, MDB4A1A1, rose not because it conquered, but because everything else disappeared. It's a marker of success, yes, but also of scarcity, of a lineage that endured while others drowned in time. This isn't theory. It's math encoded in bodies. You can see it. A shrinking circle of diversity. From Taiwan to Tonga, from Rarotonga to Rapa Nui. The genetic variation thins like mist. The ocean got bigger. The gene pool got smaller. And that raises a haunting question. How much of their old world did they carry into the new? Was the memory of their ancestors enough when their actual DNA was slipping away with every new horizon? They spoke the same language, built temples, sang to the stars. But genetically, they were no longer who they had been. They were becoming someone else. Slowly, silently, Polynesia didn't just stretch across the Pacific, it fractured across time. And at the very edge, the last stop before there was no more east, something changes again. A signal, an anomaly, a whisper in the chromosomes. Because just as isolation reached its peak, contact came from the unthinkable direction. The sweet potato should not have been there. And yet it was, growing in the soil of ancient Polynesian gardens, long before Columbus ever touched a sail. Kamara, they called it, treasured, named, woven into language, into ritual, into taste. But the plant isn't Pacific-born. It's South American, native to the Andes, the other side of the ocean. So how did it get here? For decades, scholars argued. Was it wind? Birds? A drifting seed caught in a current? But then came the deeper question. What if it wasn't the plant that traveled? What if it was the people? Then, in 2020, the silence broke. Buried in Polynesian genomes, Marquesas, Rapa Nui, researchers found something no one expected. A fragment. A ghost trace. Native American DNA. Just 1 to 3%, but unmistakable. Identical by descent segments. And the date? Around 1200 CE. 1,000 years ago. That's not drift. That's contact. Someone crossed the line. But who? No Polynesian DNA has ever been found in South America. No bones. No artifacts. Just that lingering root, the sweet potato, and a sliver of genetic memory carried in Polynesian blood. Was it trade? A storm-tossed canoe landing on a Colombian shore? Or a deliberate voyage eastward into the unknown, past the edge of mapped water? Because if the sweet potato came first, what else might have followed? A language? A god? A child? This isn't just about crops. It's about connection. The collision of two vast oceanic cultures. One from the Andes, one from the atolls, meeting somewhere out of sight. And the genetics don't lie. The encounter happened. But what it meant, whether it was peaceful, violent, accidental, or destined, that part remains hidden. Was it a one-way voyage, or the beginning of something bigger? They stare with no eyes, but they see everything. Across Rapa Nui, the Moai stand like sentinels. Massive, silent, alone. Some buried to their necks in soil, others fallen like forgotten kings. Carved from volcanic stone, hauled across a treeless island, positioned to face inland, not the sea, but the people. For generations, their purpose was a riddle. Ancestor worship, protection, madness. But when scientists traced the DNA of the people who raised them, a pattern began to form. Not just in genes, in stone. From the Marquesas to Revavi, Mangariva to Easter Island, cultures separated by vast distances and violent seas, all built statues. All venerated their dead through towering stone. And all shared the same ancestors. A single lineage split into waves. One that stretched from the heart of the Pacific to its very edge. Their genetic code, almost identical. Their art, echoing the same soul. They were cousins in bone and blood, descendants of Lapita Voyagers, whose tattoos once mirrored the stamps on pottery. Now they left marks in rock. Even in isolation, something held. A thread unbroken. Through famine, collapse. Through whispers of war and colonial erasure, the ancestral voice carved itself into cliffs, into basalt, into faces that do not blink. And now, with genomic tools sharper than obsidian, scientists can see what the statues never forgot. Rapa Nui wasn't an anomaly. It was continuity, the final echo of a memory that had been shouted across the ocean in stone. Because the bodies changed, the names changed, but the code remained. And it wasn't only in the statues, because these weren't the only legacies carved in silence. They argued for decades, fast train or slow boat. Was Polynesia built by a lightning-fast leap across islands, or by slow, tangled drifts through Melanesian shorelines? The data refused to choose, because both stories were true, and both not quite. For years, the genetic split was treated like a war. One side saw pure Austronesian bloodlines, a race of seafarers sprinting across the Pacific, untouched. The other? A swirling blend, a slow diffusion, absorbing Papuan genes along the way. But then, the genomes cracked the silence. What they found wasn't a blur, it was a sequence, a timeline. The first wave, those earliest Lapita Voyagers, they carried almost no Papuan DNA. Their genomes were clean, East Asian, Austronesian, like whispers from Taiwan still echoing in the sails. But then, after the canoes had landed, after the first fires were lit, after the first stories had been spoken in new lands, something changed. A second wave, not of boats, of people. Papuan men, arriving later. Not enemies. Not random. Integrated. And here's the twist. The culture stayed Austronesian. The language. The mothers. The myths. They weren't overwritten. They were upheld. Carried by women whose mitochondrial lines stretched straight back to Asia. But the fathers? They came from different forests. Different gods. Different genes. This wasn't accidental admixture. It wasn't chaos. It was a system. Matrilocal society, where men married in, and women held the line. Where the culture welcomed outsiders, but guarded its heart. So the answer isn't speed. It's memory. These weren't canoes drifting on tides. They were vessels of precision, steering through centuries of identity, choosing what to keep and what to let in. The fast train brought the language. The slow boat brought the blood. But the boat was never one speed. It was always steering through memory. For years, the story of Rapa Nui was one of collapse, a paradise lost, a civilization that carved gods into stone, then cut down its last tree, starved, and vanished. But what if that was never true? Beneath the volcanic soil, in bones preserved by time and silence, a different truth emerged. Ancient DNA, pulled from skulls once thought to belong to a vanished people, told a story not of extinction, but endurance. Their lineage didn't disappear. It lived on. From the first settlers around 1200 CE, through centuries of drought, conflict, and European contact. The genome was intact, the people continuous. And then came the twist. Those same bones, that same DNA, held something more. A whisper from the Far East. Native American ancestry, dated precisely to the same moment Polynesians first arrived. It wasn't a legend. It wasn't a botanical clue. It was real. Contact between worlds, between navigators from Colombia and the last outpost of the Great Polynesian Migration. Rapa Nui wasn't a final chapter. It was a meeting point. The furthest reach of the canoe, the edge of Pacific memory, touched by another ocean story. And in that moment, 800 years ago, two great migrations brushed against each other. The Moai weren't built in isolation. They stood witness to something more, something our maps never showed. Because Polynesian voyaging didn't stop at the islands. It didn't fade into myth. It pushed farther, longer, deeper into the unknown than any skeptic dared believe. And now, the story of collapse becomes a story of resilience. But it raises a deeper question. If this one island hid so much, what else lies beneath the ash, waiting to rewrite who we are? They searched for it in every direction. West of Tahiti, beneath the waves, hidden in clouds. Hawaiki, the ancestral homeland, the place of beginnings and of return. A name whispered in prayer, in death chants, in the silence between paddles striking water. But what if Hawaiki was never a single island? What if it was a rhythm, a pattern, not carved into stone, but encrypted into the body? Because the truth is, every Polynesian carries Hawaiki inside them, in their cells, in the fragments passed from mother to daughter, from father to son, across thousands of years and millions of waves. It's not myth. It's mitochondrial. Your ancestors left breadcrumbs behind, not in sand, but in base pairs, silent instructions on how to remember, even when memory fades. They weren't just travelers. They were time machines. Each migration eastward, a question. Each island settled, an answer, but not a final one. Because even now, the genome doesn't whisper endings. It opens doors. We trace them backward, through Melanesia, through Taiwan, back to the forests of southern China. But they don't stop there. The bloodlines twist and loop, not linear, but lyrical. Because Hawaiki isn't just where your people came from. It's everything they carried through storms, everything they chose to keep, and everything they were forced to lose. It's the voices in your bones. You carry oceans in your bloodline. So ask yourself, What is your Hawaiki? And who did your ancestors meet on their way to you? If you're drawn to lost histories, if you feel the pull of ancient DNA like a tide in your chest, subscribe. Because this story isn't over.